I had a lot of Sanjay Jalkar. He hopped on Zoom, helped me out. Oh, like Korea? Yeah.
When you tell people you say you did like it, I like it. I learned all about it. We had fun. One kid was just a genius. All the time. And then I I think it's like a very good chance. It's not like 100%. I'm like, still, I'm looking at other opportunities out there, and also maybe a local grad school. But I think probably more likely. What about you? Are you on the book? So like we have like our microprocessor in school to like we're like actually talking with the register and how that values and it's like very so it's cool. I like it. You're too far away class.
Okay, we were almost finishing up on this first chapter, and in this part we are talking about summarizing performance with a single number. So the issues were selecting the benchmark program or programs, and there are multiple standard benchmarks like spec benchmarks for general purpose computing and for other field like embedded systems. There are other benchmark programs, etc. But then once you take a benchmark set of programs, you have multiple programs, so how do you summarize everything with everything to a single number? And did we talk about arithmetic mean and the problem with that? Did we talk about the problem of using arithmetic mean for? We did. Okay. Yeah, we did. Okay. And so it's a better idea to use geometric mean here to do that. So now the SPEC consortium, they have come up with a specific way to come up with a single number, which they call as spec ratio. Now they also do separate spec ratio for integer programs and floating point programs. If if you care about those differences, you can use those two numbers. So no matter which way you do, when you summarize to a single number, you're losing information. So you have to be aware of that. So when you have a spec ratio, which is a single number somehow gotten from the benchmark, then if you want to compare performance, you can just divide the spec ratio for one of them divided by the other, and that will give you a number which kind of gives you an idea of where things stand. And when companies release processors, companies like Intel, AMD, they do specify what is their spec ratio, as well as spec integer ratio and spec floating point ratio. Okay, I think we already talked about that. Now, when you use geometric mean, the normal standard deviation does not make sense. You have to use also what's called the geometric standard deviation, sometimes called multiplicative standard deviation. So there is this picture here. For instance, this is giving the performance spec FP ratio. So it's just for floating point benchmark programs from I believe, yeah, that's 2000. So these are the spec 2000 floating point benchmarks. And for this particular processor, the Intel Itanium 2, these were the spec FP ratios. So you have that, and now how do you summarize that with a single number? If we use the geometric mean, then the geometric mean here is this green line here. So that's the geometric mean of all these points. The arithmetic mean, I don't know, I mean, just looking at that, maybe it could be slightly above, because this is clearly a big outlier which will skew the arithmetic mean more than the geometric mean. So So the arithmetic mean could probably be somewhere there, whereas the geometric mean is this green line over there. And when you use geometric mean, so now we have geometric standard deviation. So one geometric standard deviation away from this blue line and the purple line here. If it were arithmetic standard deviation, they would both be equidistant. But because it's geometric standard deviation, so the green divided by the blue, that number should be equal to the purple divided by the green. Okay, so this side it will be more. Okay, so that's how we typically do by taking the spec ratio for each program. We summarize that with a single number like that. Now, in this specific case, it's probably worthwhile to look at which are the outliers in performance, and that is those that are not within one geometric standard deviation. So, in this case, this one, and barely this, and maybe barely that one too. Now, comparing this to the data for another processor, the AMD Athlon. If you look at the geometric mean, the Athlon has a slightly lower geometric mean. This one was 2712. This is 2086. So it's lower than that, but it's more predictable. You see, for the Intel one, it was like going like that. This is more or less everybody is having approximately the same spec ratio value. So naturally, the geometric standard deviation is also smaller. So anytime you go for a single number, you are losing information. Now, it would be better to have the full picture, but that's a lot of data, and so that's why most people then summarize it with a single number. So again, the outliers here, that one. Yeah, but they're almost really sitting at that, like this one, and this is slightly below the standard deviation line. Okay, now to summarize, every chapter in the book has what they call fallacies and pitfalls. Fallacies are commonly held misconceptions. Pitfalls are easily made mistakes. And so some examples, as far as this chapter is concerned, we talked about benchmarks, and the fallacy is once you come up with a set of benchmarks, they are relevant for an indefinite period of time, and that's definitely not the case. I think I already talked about the spec being revised every 3 to 5 years. And that's because applications change over time. And like if you look at more recent applications, there's certainly a more heavy usage for machine learning applications, etc., which probably were not there maybe 5, 10 years ago. So we can expect the next release to have maybe more, at least 1 or 2 machine learning type programs, etc. So depending on what people are using, So that's what SPEC and other committees decide on having as benchmark. Then pitfall is an easily made mistake. Single point of failure means sometimes you try to strengthen a system by having a lot of redundancy, but there could still be some single point of failure. For instance, we talked about error correcting code, or you must be familiar with error correcting code for memory. So if you have memory and let's say this is the data, you can store some redundancy check bits. So this is the actual data, these are the check bits, redundant bits. So if one of the bits gets flipped, then the check bits for that one will be indicating that there is an error, etc. So that's a good scheme, and by incorporating more check bits, you can actually cover more errors, multi-bit errors and all that using the redundancy. But what if the circuit that checks or calculates the check bits has an error, has a defect? Then this all this redundancy, everything is really of no use, right? So you have to be aware that there are going to be parts in the system, if they fail, there's a problem. I mean, a good example is what's called triple modular redundancy, TMR. Used to be used in spacecraft and things like that, where you sent a spacecraft. There's a lot more radiation out there than while you're on Earth. So there's more chance for things to go wrong. And also, if something goes wrong, it's very difficult to fix because it's in space. So triple modular redundancy means make everything 3 times. So if you're using some computer, make 3 of those, and do computation separately in 3, and then use a voter. So these 3 will give their results, and the voter will just do a majority vote. So that, and there are even 5-way redundancy too. So 5 and then choosing the majority would be 3. I mean, you want to have an odd number, but this is a single point of failure, right? I mean, if this is all working fine, but the voter has a problem, then everything is then going to be wrong. So that is a single point of failure, but unfortunately in this case there is nothing you can do. I mean, if you add more voters, then but then somebody has to finally make the assessment as to which is correct. Actually, there are techniques to handle that. Have multiple voters and have them communicate back and forth, a distributed scheme, but that's really beyond this course. So the main point we are trying to make is when you are building a system and you are looking for reliability, you have to be aware of any single point failures in the system and do whatever it needs. Now, most of the space, this thing, what they do, this voter is a small piece of hardware, so this is made what's called radiation hardened, which means mainly cover it with appropriate metal to so that if any radiation, anything comes, that can be absorbed and will not affect the functioning of this, etc. Okay, this again continuing in that theme, we made a calculation earlier for there were these 10 hard disks and one disk controller and one power supply. We made a calculation a few slides ago. Mainly we added up the failure rates for all 10 of the disks, the failure rate for the disk controller and the failure rate for the power supply, added them all together and got a single number for the failure rate, and reciprocal of that was the mean time to failure for this entire system. Now that is based on some assumptions which may not be true. The assumptions, one of the major assumptions is that these failures are all independent. So if you have two disks, the fundamental assumption is that they fail completely independent of each other. But in real life that's not true. Whatever affects this one, maybe something happened and there was a power spike. Chances are that that's going to affect this one also. So those simple calculations may tend to give a feeling that, oh, okay, disk drives, they're very reliable. Also, we use the exponential distribution for lifetime, which is something like that. Let's say that's the lifetime, and that's the probability density function for what the lifetime would be. Now, as for this model, let's say the mean would be somewhere here, 1 over lambda. So as per this model, that's the mean. So that's on the average, this thing will fail, around that time. Now some of them will fail earlier, some of them will keep going like that. But the thing about this model is, let's say we came up to this point and it did not fail at all. What is the new likelihood for it to fail? It has the memoryless property. So if it has not failed till then, that means now it is a different curve. That's how the calculations are based on, okay, this is called the memoryless property. The fact that it already survived for this long has no bearing on its likelihood. It's as if it's starting afresh. But again, we know that that's not true. If you take pretty much any hardware device, it has wear and tear. Even processor chips. Let's say a processor has been working correctly for 2 years. We buy these refurbished items, but in reality, there is a lot of wear and tear. Every time the temperature goes up significantly and then comes down, that's called a thermal cycle, and some like what's called electromigration, etc. happens. So if you have a wire inside that silicon, this is, I'm just showing it very magnified. Okay, so every time there is this thermal cycle, some atoms may move. So some atoms can move because of the high temperature, so they may break from their bond and so it may travel. So let's say if something like this happens, some atoms ended up moving from there to here. Now what happens is this part, the resistance is higher because the cross-sectional area is less here. so higher resistance, which means more heat uh, uh, happening here. So which will then accelerate the process. So eventually, you have like that, and this is how defects start. So after some time, it can become an open circuit. And these things cannot be accurately modeled by models like this. So you have to understand that all these reliability calculations we do with very simplifying assumptions are limited. That okay. This is just concluding this chapter. Okay.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yeah.
So last time I think we did arithmetic, but we did go over geometric.
Oh, we did or did not?
I don't think we did go over geometric.
Okay. Did we go over the fact that arithmetic mean would be a bad thing for summarizing ratios? No?
Yeah, we did.
Huh?
Yeah, we talked about that. You gave the example where you have like the sorry, I forget like exactly what
Yeah,
the example
yeah.
was, but we did
My
the example.
problem is because I'm taking 646 also. And
Yeah, we did it in both.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm doing 3 for the same. E and PM also I'm using the same. So difficult to keep remembering what I said where. Yeah, but I can certainly go over very quickly. Mainly when you have ratios, let's say we have 3 programs, 1, 2, 3, and the performance comparison of 2 systems. Let's say this one was 1.2, this is 0.8, and this was 10. So for this one, system A did 20% better. So the ratio was 1.2. This one, B did 20% better. This one, A is doing 10 times better than B. Okay, now if you take the arithmetic mean of these 3, that will be 10 plus 2, 12 divided by 3, so you get arithmetic mean to be 4. So it gives an impression that system A will perform 4 times better than B with the arithmetic mean. This one figure ended up skewing it, so it's 4. Now the geometric mean of this, what would it be, I think? Some calculators have that. Let's see. Okay, so cube root of all those things. That would be be 0.96, 9.6. 2.13. So you can see geometric mean in some sense is better here, whereas arithmetic mean just gave an impression for, because actually for one program it is slower, another one only 20%, but just this one program is 10 times performance. So yeah.
How'd you get 9.6 for the sum? Like, oh wait, you multiplied all three of them, my bad.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from chapter 1? Yeah.
You're talking about TMR. Are you kind of saying that like components have to be there have to be multiple components in a computer so it doesn't fail? So if one fails, the system isn't completely
This is called fault tolerant compute. So you don't really detect the fault, you don't, you're just tolerating it by introducing redundancy. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so what we did in chapter 1 was just lay the foundation, the main things, etc. And now we will look at specific systems. We will start with the memory system. Some of the discussion in memory system relates to pipelining, but if I take pipelining, that relates to memory system. So whichever way I do, we have to go a little bit out of order. So I think memory system may be the best one to do first. So we will do the memory system. Okay, the initial 2-3 slides are same as we saw in chapter 1, like this one is same as we have seen before. But fundamentally, if you look at processor performance and memory performance over the last several years, processor performance has been going along this curve, which is exponential because this is logarithmic scale. Memory performance has been also exponential, but there is a gap between these, and the gap has always been increasing. So we call this as the processor memory gap, or is more commonly called the memory wall, meaning whatever you do to get performance in the processor, unless you do something about the memory also, that memory will end up being the bottleneck. So you will not really see any benefits if you're just focusing only on processor. You have to do something about the memory. So that's called the memory wall, and it is stemming from the basic von Neumann model of computing where we have a processor and memory as two separate things. And all of the data processing is happening here, all of the data storage is happening there, which means anything you want to do on data, you have to bring the data to the processor, do some processing, and then write it back. So, and this is really a bottleneck. I think in chapter 1 we talked about latency versus bandwidth. Now, you can always increase the bandwidth. You just have to provide more wires. You can increase the bandwidth. But the problem is latency. Latency, we saw lags, improvement in bandwidth, and so the memory tends to have higher and higher latency. If you look at some of the very first microprocessors, the Intel timing diagram, etc., memory access was only like 3 cycles, 4 cycles, etc. And sometimes memory won't be able to respond immediately, so you have a signal to say, okay, wait, and memory would say wait, and processor would wait maybe another couple of cycles or so, and then memory would respond. But as illustrated there, the gap grew. Right now, it's actually more than 100 cycles. This is talking about processor cycles. So in terms of processor's clock speed, it takes more than 100 cycles to get data from memory. And that's only going to continue to go up. Some of the research work, not a lot, but a little bit work focuses on somehow trying to make the memory more intelligent and do processing here. It's kind of modeled after the brain, because the way our brain works is not this model, like having a processor in some part of the brain and then memory in another part of the brain. Instead, it is done differently. Processing and storage, everything is happening together. So somehow try to do processing here. So it's called PIM, processing in memory. But it's all just mostly research, and for special purpose, some computing, etc. Yeah, you can do that. But for general purpose computing, it is still not there. So for general purpose computing, the idea is not to bring processing over there, but to bring the memory closer to here. Okay, so in order to do that, we use this hierarchy in the next slide. So the actual memory is still sitting far away and is big and slow, but we introduce additional structures here, which are closer to the processor and smaller in size than this, so they can be fast. So this is showing the full memory hierarchy, starting from registers, cache memory. You could have multiple levels of cache memory, then main memory, disk, and archival storage. This is what we saw in chapter 1. And in this chapter, we are going to look at these two in more detail. So we'll look at cache memory, try to build on what you already learned in 350 about basic cache organization. So we'll try to do more than that, especially techniques for improving performance. We'll also talk about virtual memory, which is also something you saw in 350, but we will try to talk about these two together also, because all systems have both cache memory and virtual memory. So integrating them together needs some work. So that's what we are going to look at in this chapter. This is just for to give you an idea of what kind of sizes there are. So this is for a specific processor, the Apple iMac G5. Register size, instruction, level 1 instruction cache size, level 1 data cache size, level 2 unified cache, DRAM, and disk. You can see it's steadily increasing going from there, and the speed is steadily increasing going from here. That's only one clock cycle registers. L1 caches 3 clock cycles, L2 cache 11, and DRAM 8 clock cycles. Hard disk 10 to the power 7. And this is giving a die photo. Die photo means the VLSI transistor level layout for this cache memory, etc. So that's the chip we're talking about here. One thing you would see, if you look at the scale of size, registers 1K, let's say 1K bits. This is 64K, so 64 times. Both these together would be 96K, so 96 times that. And then that would be another. And then if you look at the L2 cache, 512K, not really significantly bigger than L1 cache. Certainly not 5 times the size. So what is going on here? It's because they use different technology, or rather different transistor connection, etc. When it comes to registers, the way data is stored is different from cache memory, and it's different from L2. You may have studied in 303 maybe. So like here, DRAM, that is built with dynamic RAM, where each one bit of data is stored in one transistor only. So it's only one transistor per cell. Very dense. Now that's not in this picture. When building cache memories, we typically use SRAM, static RAM. But there also you have 6 transistor design, 12 transistor design, etc. In general, when it comes to memory, the more dense you try to make it, chances are it's going to be slower, just because of the way it is done. That's not true for just building hardware logic. Combinational logic is different. Generally, if it's smaller, that means it's faster. But when it comes to memory, like DRAM is slow because of the way that 1 or 0 is stored, etc. Okay, so but this is just so that you have an idea. We are generally going to talk more about microarchitecture level techniques, so not particularly going to look at transistor level designs, etc. Okay, from 350, you know why the memory hierarchy works. it works because of the principle of locality. If a program does not display this principle, does not have that, if memory accesses are completely random all over the place, memory hierarchy is not going to help. In fact, it may even hurt performance, because you need to get the data from memory. You are using a cache memory in between, and so instead of this, so it's now going to go this way. And so you first look in the cache, and if the data is not there, then you go to memory, etc. And so if most of the time you're not going to get the data here, you're actually taking more time because it's sequential. First looking here, then getting data from here, and usually you don't get one word, you get a whole block of data, but program has really no locality, so all of that is waste. Okay. But in practice, most programs have good locality, so that's why memory hierarchy works. And we want to try to exploit both of these localities, not just one of them. We'll talk about that later, why it is important to try to make use of both locality. Okay, again, some of these are very basic things you already saw in 350. Terminologies like cache hit, cache miss, etc. And this is an equation may not be particularly useful for calculating memory access time, but it's helpful for us to reason about cache memory design. So let me write that equation here. Average access time is the time to access a cache plus M is miss ratio, meaning what fraction of the memory references end up being not in the cache. So the reasoning for this is every memory access would need accessing of the cache, the time to access the cache, plus this fraction of the time it's not there, so you have to service that miss. Mainly send the request to the next level and get the data from there. So that's this equation. Now, this equation assumes that things are happening strictly sequential, okay, which means only one request is being sent, and only after that request is completed, the next request will be sent, etc. And that is no longer the case. For now many years, both processors and cache memories have advanced. So this equation is not really helpful for calculating the average memory access time, because when the processor is sending a request, and if it's a miss and it's being serviced, processor may still keep sending other requests. So the question is, where do you charge that to? In this sequential model, yeah, it's easy to charge time appropriately. So you take some time to look at the cache, that's easy, and if you miss, then you do this. But let's say when that miss is being serviced, this is in parallel, it is getting several hits. Okay, so this would be probably the most pessimistic value for T average. In real life, it would be better than that, because while a miss is being serviced, it may be servicing other hits and so. Okay, so but we will still use this equation in our discussion, and this equation you would have seen in 350. Okay. Okay, now we saw the memory hierarchy, different levels of the hierarchy. For each level, we can ask 4 questions. These two are closely related. Where can a block be placed in cache memory or upper level? And second, how will it be found? Third, that's actually also related to that. When the cache becomes full and you want to bring a new data item, which one should you replace? And this is, should you have write through cache or write back cache? So this is something you should be knowing from 350. 3 types of mapping. Maybe, yeah, let's look at the fully associative mapping. So processor has sent a request, and memory controller has figured it, or the cache controller figured that that should be going to memory block number 12. And it's a miss in the cache, so this should be fetched, but where should it be placed? What are the choices for placing it? In fully associative mapping, the choice is it can be placed anywhere in the cache. The other extreme is direct mapping, where there is exactly 1 frame where it can go, which in this case is 4. And that's obtained by taking a mod function. So 12 is the block, 12 mod 8, because we have 8 frames. So 12 mod 8 is 4, and that's the only place where it can be placed. The 2 extremes. Now, in light of this equation, for whatever it's worth, what are the trade-offs in using each of these 2 mappings? Yeah.
I mean, if you use like direct mapping, what if that location is already full? Like.
Oh yeah, like 4 is already
Yeah.
occupied.
Say,
Yeah.
Let's say it's already occupied or something.
You have 2 options. One is to keep whatever is there in 4 and not copy the new one. The other option is to replace.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the option that's pretty much followed, which is you discard the one that's already there and put this thing here. Okay, so we want to compare the 2 mappings in light of this expression. So when you use direct mapping, it's easy for the cache controller to look in there and see if what it's looking for is there or not. For instance, there is a request for 12, block 12. It does not need to look in every frame, but it can just, it needs to look at only 1 frame. So with direct mapping, this will be low, small, that's with direct mapping. But the drawback is there is a potential for more conflicts. You see, block 12 would map there, block 20 would also map there, 28 would map there, 4 will also map there. So there are 4 blocks, 4, 12, 20, 28, that can all map to that frame. If the program is accessing 2 or more of these blocks frequently back and forth, they will constantly replace each other from that frame, resulting in higher. Yeah. So with direct mapping, you have the potential for lower TC and higher. Yeah. Fully associative mapping is just the other extreme, so it will be the other way around. In general, whatever you do to decrease M tend to increase this and vice versa. So it's very difficult really to bring these two down at the same time. I mean, you can think of different techniques, like you see M is too high, okay, so you're trying to reduce that by increasing the cache size, bigger cache. What's going to happen? M will certainly come down because you're using a bigger cache, but now it's bigger, so it will be slower, so TC will be that high. Or there are too many conflict misses, so you're trying to increase the associativity. Instead of using direct mapping, you're trying to go to fully associative, or more likely a hybrid of the two, a set associative mapping. Now TC would go up. Yeah.
Why not just add more levels of cache? Remember how we had the diagram where we had hierarchy of cache? There's L1.
Right.
L3,
Yes.
Keep increasing that.
L1, L2. Yeah. That for accounting purposes, we say that is helping with not with M but with T miss. See, it's like this. Processor sends a request to cache. Either you have it there or you don't have. If you don't have, then that's a miss. So you are charging that to counting miss. Now the fact that you have other caches close by means that miss may not be a very terrible miss. So instead of saying, okay, now we have fewer misses, we say, okay, that means now we are getting our miss service a lot faster. Makes sense? We're trying to fit everything to this equation, and I think I said way up front that the equation is we're stretching it too much now with all these newer additions to the cache and all that. But traditionally, multi-level cache is considered as a way to reduce t-miss. Okay, so this is a trade-off to keep in mind, and in general we have a lot of direct map cache. We have two-way set associative map and four-way set associative also, and rarely eight-way associative. It's difficult to go beyond that. Fully associative cache especially is not there, mainly because you definitely don't want to look sequentially, because a cache may have thousands of frames and that would be very slow. You do the access in parallel, which means in this case you will have 8 comparators all working in parallel, trying to do a compare, and then a multiplexer which will then select the one that matched. All that would mean a lot more power consumption and definitely more delay than these. Yeah.
So when a processor like checks cache, how does it know if the data is valid? It's like a hit versus if it's a miss and it has to go to memory. Because all it's doing is like checking it caches.
Right, okay, that's the next slide. Actually, question number 2. How does it know the data is there or not? So this is the full address, okay, 32-bit or whatever, and these bits are gone. No, we don't need to worry about that. This is giving the block number. So I use this illustration in 350.
Are you saying that entire thing is just an entire address, like that's just, you're splitting up the
Yeah,
entire address?
That's what I was saying. In 350, I use this illustration like when you are going to a room in a hotel, say 1673, we would split it like that and go to the 16th floor. We are actually doing a division by 100, but this is a decimal number system and 100 is a power of 10, so we don't really need to do a real division, we just split it like that. So we go to the 16th floor. Once we get to the 16th floor, then we go to the 73rd room. So the same way, you have this big address, and it's a binary address, but the block size is kept as a power of 2, just like here 100 power of 10. So the division becomes straightforward. Here you don't really need to do any division, just partitioning of the bits. So this straight away gives the block address. Once you have the block address, we do the same thing. The number of cache set or frames, whichever, that's also kept as a power of 2, so you can again do another division to get the mod. So you don't need to do the 2 divisions sequentially. You get a 32-bit address. These wires go in one way, these wires go to select the cache set, and these go to do the matching. So it's split like that. The thing about cache controller is it does not really have much time. It has to do in, see, like we saw that one was 3 cycles. But 3 cycles is less than a nanosecond. With say 4 gigahertz clock, one clock is only 0.25 nanoseconds. So 3 cycles means it's only 0.75 nanosecond, less than a nanosecond. So obviously there is no time to do division and all that. It has to be some simple technique. So we do that. Now this does not take any time because the wires are coming and you route the wire. You just take these set of wires and you immediately get your cache set. And then let's assume this one, two-way set association. So we took the middle bits for 12 and got 0. So we immediately go there, 0. And read both of the tag fields from these 2. And that takes maybe 1 cycle or something just to read the 2 tag bits. And then the tag bits are compared with these upper bits from the address. And depending on which one matches, the multiplexer will select the data. The data is also read in parallel. So the tag is read, the data is also read in parallel. I can go ahead. Okay, so this is coming from one, both are from set 0. This is frame 0 from there, frame 1, the data, and the select is from the comparator. So there are these two comparators that compare the tag. So two tags are read, they are compared, and depending on, at most one can match. I mean, if both are matching, there is something severely wrong with the controller. So only one of them will match, and depending on which one matched, this select signal will be either 0 or 1. And if none of them matches, then it will be an invalid. So it will say whatever is being read from here is all invalid. So that's how this will be done. So you get the data. Now it will be reading a whole block. We don't need that. We only need one word. So either after the selection, we feed it into a multiplexer and use the last one, or we use another multiplexer here. So that's how we do. So more the associativity, that means more comparators and a bigger mux here. Bigger the block size, this will be more, so the multiplexer that selects the particular word will be bigger. So nothing is for free. You make the block bigger to get more spatial locality. That means it is going to hurt somewhere. Those are questions 1 and 2 from here. The third one is replacement. For a direct math cache, replacement is pretty straightforward. There's really no choice. As we said earlier, I mean, we could choose not to replace, but that's never done. I mean, you always think you're just requesting for some new data, chances are that's more hot than the one that's there before, so you would do a replacement. But no algorithm is used. Whereas when there is more associativity like here, you have a choice. Let's say both are full and you're bringing in now 28. Which one should you replace? So there are different algorithms. Probably the one that gives the best performance in general is what's called the LRU, least recently used. So you replace the least recently used one. That's the LRU one. Now the LRU means you have to keep additional information about usage. like the order in which they were accessed. For two-way set associative cache is not really a big deal. You can easily, with one bit, you can keep track of who is the one that was accessed more recently or least recently. But once you get to 4-way, 8-way, etc., there's just, you have to store the full order. What order all of these were referenced. And that's a lot of work. So some cache designs, especially when the associativity is bigger, would just randomly replace one of them. That means you don't need to really keep track of how the usage is and etc. Obviously, the performance would be a little worse than LR.
Is there a way that you could like look ahead and see how you should like literally organize the caches? Like,
Yeah, I mean, see, that's the thing. Looking ahead means somehow you're seeing the future.
not look ahead, I mean, keeping those order. Like, if you know that you're getting like a stream of information, right?
Oh, yeah. That is called prefetching. Yes, based on stride, etc. Yeah, you can do that. You can certainly do, but simple caches don't do that. But there are cache memories that look at stride and see, oh, it looks like the pattern is going like that. Okay, and then go ahead and prefetch that. For replacement, I'm not aware of anybody doing that. Also, another thing is companies like Intel or Time or these kind of details as to how they do cache replacement and things like that. I mean, everybody says, okay, we have this much cache, we have this much this, etc. But nobody really says more about these kind of small things. But they are important things, though. But that they don't usually advertise. Okay, so I think we can stop there and so we'll be on next. Yeah.